Hey, Kayla,
Hey, Gretchen.
let's talk about this new book coming out, Text Structures from Picture Books.
Oh, yes. Our new book that's hopefully going to come out the end of this school year.
And it's going to have lessons in it that are going to help people with all kinds of things besides just picture books, isn't it?
Yep, it's going to get kids writing and talking and maybe even preparing for the STAR, which is great for our Texas teacher friends.
Well, why don't we show everybody the secret weapon that's the lesson in here that's going to help the most with the ECRs, aka the extended constructed responses.
All right. So we'll pretend that we just read these two books, Each Kindness by Jacqueline Woodson and The Invisible Boy by Trudy Ludwig.
Okay, and now what would we do if we had those two books under our belts and someone handed us the prompt, which is worse, being laughed at or being ignored?
What would we do?
What would we do?
Let's try the Truism Braid.
Okay, first we would draw on our page the lines that are in the middle of that page, the big capital I, and then that would become our graphic organizer. Step by step, we're going to walk through. First, we'd write the question at the top.
Which is worse, being laughed at or being ignored?
And because this was actually used by a group of teachers in Edinburgh, Texas, we are going to take a look at how they answered and worked through this process. So their answer was what?
Being laughed at is worse than being ignored.
Okay, so if you asked, how do you know that from the stories? Would go down to the first box on the left and come up with one piece of text that has to do with it.
Okay, so JT glances in Brian's direction and just as quickly looks away. So that's from The Invisible Boy.
Now, if we asked, well, what was happening in that? I didn't read that story. So what's happening in that story that has to do with being laughed at or being ignored? You'd fill in those lines with an explanation.
So in The Invisible Boy, Brian isn't chosen to play on a team.
So that's what's happening right at the moment of that quote. Do you see the rectangular area down at the bottom? That's for writing a truism.
What's a truism, Gretchen?
Well, Kayla, a truism is a sentence that's a sentence that's a life lesson. It's also known as a theme, but we find it easy for kids to come up with one. If we think of it as a life lesson, something that people generally know, something that's true about life or the world, that has to do with that moment in Brian's life. So, what truism would you think has to do with being ignored?
It really hurts to feel invisible.
That's so true. Mm-hmm. So, those are the parts now to cover one of the books. Now, we're going to look at the other book, and it probably has to do with being laughed at. So, where do you know how bad it is to be laughed at? How do you know that? And you think of one little piece of text.
Well, when I thought about it, the quote "never knew" came to mind.
So what was happening at the moment of that never knew quote? We'll fill that in.
In Each Kindness, Kendra and her friends called Maya this nickname because Maya wore hand-me-downs.
So what's a truism that would go with that part?
Hurtful words make you feel targeted in front of everybody.
Oh, that's true.
Okay.
So now we get highlighters, because here comes the part that's different. But before we go, this really is very similar to what people are doing all over the country, called the acronym of ACE or RACE, where they think of an answer, they write text evidence, they explain the evidence, but these truisms, to end those parts, they extend the explanation just a little further and give it a richness that isn't part of those other acronyms. Go ahead. Now, we think of what's a keyword in this first truism. If you have a hard time thinking of what's a keyword, do you?
I do.
Okay, then close your eyes.
Okay.
I'm going to read it to you. It really hurts to feel invisible. Which one of those words pops up at you?
Invisible.
Yeah, so we're going to highlight it with a color. And now let's look at the other one. Close your eyes.
Okay.
Hurtful words make you feel targeted in front of everybody. Open your eyes now, Kayla, and tell me, which of those words popped up at you?
Well, this time more than one came up. Hurtful words and targeted.
Let's color all of those with a different color, like green. And now, here comes the part where the craft becomes invisible to a reader, but it's so easy for the writer to plan out. We're going to take those words and bring those two colors to the top and the bottom. That is, to the conclusion at the bottom and the intro in the top. And look what happens when we start writing those words in both places.
It's starting to get colorful.
It sure is. First, we're going to highlight the actual answer. Being laughed at is worse than being ignored, to make sure that it appears also in the conclusion. Okay.
Oh.
Now look at what happened. We copied those words, invisible and hurtful words and targeted, into the top and bottom. And then there's no right way to do this, but just to play with combining those thoughts together to mean what you want it to mean any way that you want to, by changing the words or adding words or moving them around. Let's hear how that introductory answer sounds now.
Well, do we want it to sound exactly the same?
As what?
As it does in the beginning, in the introduction?
The conclusion and the introduction? No, it's really better if they sound different.
Oh, okay. So being ignored or invisible makes you feel hurt, but being laughed at is worse because those hurtful words are aimed right at you and can make you feel like a target.
So you read the conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
Now read the introduction.
Being laughed at is worse than being ignored or invisible because hurtful words turn you into a target.
Do you see how it's expanded more in the conclusion?
Mm-hmm.
And it uses some different words, and they're in a little bit different order. So that's fair, isn't it fair?
It's fair.
Actually better. So what would this look like if you turned it? Wait a minute. If kids are sitting at a computer on test day, they can't write this.
You're right.
But they have scratch paper.
They have scratch paper.
They could create this and get it to this stage before they turn to their computer and start tapping out their essay.
Well, how would they turn this into an essay?
I don't know for sure. But the top would be the first paragraph. The second and third paragraphs would be the middle. And the fourth part would be the conclusion. So let's see how this would look.
Okay. So if they typed it all up, it would look like this. Being laughed at is worse than being ignored or feeling invisible because hurtful words turn you into a target. In The Invisible Boy, Brian isn't chosen to play on a team. When choosing the teams, JT glances in Brian's direction and just as quickly looks away. It really hurts to feel invisible. Never knew. In Each Kindness, Kendra and her friends give Maya this nickname because Maya wore hand-me-downs. Hurtful words make you feel targeted in front of everybody. Being ignored or invisible makes you feel hurt, but being laughed at is worse. Those hurtful words are aimed right at you and make you feel like a target.
That's really streamlined and beautiful. And I suspect that would score pretty high on the rubric. If we wanted to expand it even a little bit more, it would probably be improved by how? What could we do?
Well, we could definitely work on not repeating ourselves a little bit more, maybe by adding some different words or writer's craft, or maybe even going a little bit deeper into each of these body paragraphs and by adding a little bit more explanation or even giving another example of how Brian felt invisible or how Kendra and her friends laughed at Maya.
That's right. We would use those voices, the like what voices, like to say like what, or how did that work, or what was Maya, who, identifying them by describing the moments in the story, giving a little bit of their backstory would help too.
And once you fleshed it out, we'd have a pretty solid essay.
And that's how a truism braid works.
Okay, but this video was great and all, but what if I wanted a little bit more about this lesson? Maybe some student examples or something else?
I don't know. You might have to resort to going to your handy dandy Trail of Breadcrumbs website or YouTube channel. There are videos there, more information there, and take a look. In text structures from fairy tales in the appendix, we introduced the Truism Braid back with the last test. You could sure use it adapted this way for this test.
Oh, and it looks like that great book we mentioned at the beginning also will have this wonderful lesson in it, text structures from picture
I
books.
cannot wait to get my copy. We've all loved picture books forever, and now we have reason to use them for prepping kids of any grade level for their state test. How fun would that be?
Man, this sounds great. Can't wait.
Yeah,